look at commercial EV charging. Added system load, a lot of level 2 chargers out there for this. It's still 2.5 to 19.2 kW DC. Fast chargers used to only go up to 90 kW. Now they're getting better and better with new generations. Now it's up to 350 kW. And then at stations, there are multiples of those at one location. So there are two types. There's commercial customer charging or fleet charging. That has more control, and especially as the rate design. There's a more reliable load there, and you can work with your customer in order to manage that load better. Supplying EV chargers, less control. When somebody pulls up to charge, you don't know how many you're going to get in a day or a month, and the load factors tend to be very low, especially at first. So again, there are different types of rates. There are time of use rates, and it's important that these time of use rates have a demand component simply because the load on the system is a lot more. There are more hours to manage with a time of use rate, but at least the hours are known in advance, and you're less likely to miss a peak for the impact to your power cost. There are also coincident peak rates, which work very well with larger industrial customers with fleets, I think. There are fewer hours to manage, but you need to be able to communicate that to your customer when they need to go into load management. And there is more of a possibility of missing a peak with that type of rate. So time or use rate, similar structure to the residential rate, except that there are demand charges. There's an on-peak rate, which is the maximum demand during your on-peak hours, and this can range anywhere from 3 to 8 hours I've seen. And then there's also a distribution charge, which is based on the monthly maximum kW. This is important because there are demand-related charges or demand-related costs that are not related to power costs. Your substation transformer costs, the O&M and everything associated with them, that doesn't vary based on how much power you sell. So that needs to be recovered. And this is the best way to do that. You want this to vary only when you're selling more or less power. Then energy charges, you can either have one energy rate for everything, on-peak, off-peak rates, or also on-peak, off-peak, super on-peak rates. But I think this on-peak demand can kind of prevent you having to have different energy blocks. So as an advanced time of use rate for small commercial customers or general service customers, same thing. This just adds in the on-peak and the distribution demand charges. Same kind of energy pricing with that discount rate, which is good for EV customers. And we also have the critical peak and the on-peak pricing. I think this might be more acceptable to commercial customers just because they have more communication with the utility. And if they're large enough, they have somebody there that's managing their electric usage or their plant information. I should also note that with these rates, and especially on the residential side, some utilities require the person to have an electric vehicle to be on these rates, and some don't. And there are advantages and disadvantages to each of that. I think if you require an EV vehicle, you can make the rate more tailored to somebody with an electric vehicle. It's just a matter of keeping track of, do they have one? Do you need to check in with their registration every year, or how often, just to make sure that they're still applicable or still eligible for those rates. Coincident peak rate. Same type of structure. You have a demand charge, except now it's based on a coincident peak. So now you're thinking about what hours during the month they get charged this rate. Typically, it's just 1 hour. So that's demand during the peak hour. Again, you need to be able to communicate with your customers when they need to shed load in order to reduce their demand charges. Still want to have that distribution demand charge, and then you can just have a single energy rate there. Any question about commercial rates before I move on to the cost recovery piece?
One of the things on one of the first slides with commercial, I think you had, it might be the very first one with commercial right there. the added system load, level 2 charger, 2.5 to 19.2 kW for commercial EV charging. One of the gentlemen said earlier, the new Ford vehicle is 19.2 kW. So do you take that homeowner to a commercial rate and go to a demand rate? Because obviously, if it's going to pull 19.2, you're going to have to take that 10 kW transformer up to a 25.
I think if you have to, there are a number of ways you can do it. If you have to install additional facilities to handle that load, you could charge them an additional facilities charge. Or you could have a residential demand rate. And there are some utilities that are interested in that. I don't know of anybody that switched over to it yet, simply because the data they collect still has holes in it. And they usually bill in a cycle throughout the month. And if you're going to base a demand charge on your maximum demand for a calendar month, you need to bill that way. So yeah, you would have to tailor something for them, but it is important that they should pay for what cost that they're incurring the utility. Yes.
I'm curious how this works. I don't have an electric vehicle at the moment, so I'm going to leave today. I'm going to drive from Missouri, wherever, cross country, my electric vehicle. And I stopped to recharge several times along this trip. I would suppose that I'm going to pay different rates.
Probably.
Just like today when you stop to fill up with gas. And then are we gonna, do you expect that we'll see signs pop up? Electric vehicle charging here for 3 cents, electric vehicle charging up here for 3.5 cents. So I'll pull over here and charge up instead of across the street for this one.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, well, the commercial rates I've been talking about are for your commercial customers, but EV charger rates, there is an app for that. In fact, there are a number of apps for that. You can pull up on your phone and see where stations are and what their rates are. I think you can see what their rates are. And yes, in the future, you know, how you have those blue signs that tell you when there's a service station? I'm sure very soon they're going to have those for EV chargers. Have them already. Cost recovery, very important, especially in the co-op world. We design rates based on the cost allocated to each type of customer. If you're going to have to upgrade your service lines, you're going to have to put in additional transformers. You want to make sure that those costs are being recovered properly. And that can be done through an additional facilities charge, like I was talking with the Lightning, or through the distribution demand charge. Those demand charges that are based on your maximum KW is a good way to do it. If you're talking about a large commercial customer that you're custom building something for, you might want to reduce that risk by asking for a contribution aid to construction or a contract, because if they come in and you build these facilities and then they go out of business, you want to make sure that your ratepayers aren't stuck paying for that. Okay, for utility-owned EV chargers, cost recovery through rates is difficult because the investment tends to be high, unless you can reduce that with grants or other sorts of public monies. But there's unknown usage. Usually when we develop rates, we're like, okay, these are the costs that are allocated to you. This is your usage. This is your rate. But for utility-owned EV chargers, the load factors tend to be very small. There's not a lot of usage yet. That's going to change throughout the years. But right now, you're not making money off of your EV chargers. Some co-ops are still not charging to use their EV chargers, so they're not making any money off of them. The current rates that we have are not rate-based. They're not based on the cost of the investment. They're simply, what is everyone around you charging? And what we've so far been recommending to people, level 2 charger, 14 cents a kilowatt hour, DC FS charger of 27 cents a kilowatt hour. Recommend idle fees, especially in people where they're tempted to park all day down at the beach or up in the mountains.
Quick clarification.
Yes.
A lot of commercial level 2 chargers out there are 28 to 32 cents per kilowatt hour, whether it's ChargePoint or,
Level twos?
yeah, Tesla.
Because I've seen some Teslas, they're like at 30 and 40.
That's still for the level 2, not for the DC fast charger.
Huh.
But yeah, ChargePoint and others, they are charging 28 to 30 cents.
Some other thoughts. So again, to reiterate, the rate design should send appropriate price signals to your customers so that when they change their behavior to save money, it's also saving you money. You need to be able to communicate any load management that you want to do with your customers. You need to be able to program it into your software systems. There are also solutions as far as pairing EV charging with solar and/or batteries, which is a great solution to minimizing the impact of increased capacity. System improvement plans should consider the impact of EVs. And then things to come. Sourcing from EVs during an outage. If you have a lightning and your power goes out, you can run your house off of that. Drawing from EVs for load management. I see this more as a solution on the fleet side than I do with the residential side. But with either one of these, you want to make sure that you have interconnections that are safe for the utility. So those cars aren't causing you problems that they back. Questions here? Unless there are more questions about anything.